Alrighty, so we've been talking an awful lot lately about validity and invalidity. And when we use these terms to describe an argument, we're not talking about the content of the argument, whether or not we think that we agree with the statements that comprise the argument. We're talking about the argument's form, its structure. We're looking at the statements in the argument, and we're examining how they're being brought into relationship with one another, how they're interacting with one another. This thought primer, we're going to focus on the concept of soundness. We want to get clear about what exactly a sound argument is and how to create one. All right. So remember, when we talk about validity, a valid argument is one in which it is impossible for the conclusion to be false when the premises are assumed to be true. And in an invalid argument, it's possible. It's not necessary, but it is possible for the conclusion statement to be false even when we assume the premise statements are all true. Now, we might have an invalid argument that's actually comprised of all true statements. Maybe the conclusion statement and all the premise statements are true statements. But if we look at the form of the argument and we think to ourselves, I can figure out a way to put different content into this argument form and generate a conclusion that's false even when all the premises are true, we will have proven that argument invalid. Now, a sound argument is a valid argument. Every single sound argument is also a valid argument. A sound argument is a valid argument with all true premises, but not every valid argument is a sound argument. If we have a valid argument and at least one of the premises is a false statement, we have a valid but unsound argument. Okay? Now you have in your toolbox 4 valid argument forms: modus potens, modus tollens, pure hypothetical syllogism, and disjunctive syllogism. You know that if you load up one of these argument forms with some statements, you will have an argument where the conclusion will have to be true when we assume the premises are true. Now, what we want to focus on here is, well, how can I construct one of these argument forms, these valid argument forms, with all true statements? In other words, how can I use these valid forms of argument to create sound arguments? Okay, we want to avoid the 2 dreaded invalid forms of argument that we're aware of: denying the antecedent and affirming the consequent. These are invalid forms of argument, and because they're invalid, they can never be sound. Okay, so then the question for us is, how do we construct arguments with true premises? And that sort of begs a question for us. What does it mean to say that a statement is true? And that's the question we'll take up in the next lecture.